Welcome, everybody. This is the home of PagerDuty Portugal, and it's really nice to have you all here. So I'd like to begin with a story, actually. So just a bit over 2 years ago, my wife and I moved to Portugal. We had just gotten married here. I accepted a new role upstairs at PagerDuty, and we were just buzzing to be back. So immediately, like an eager beaver, I began studying Portuguese. So it took a bit of time to find the right app with Brazilian Portuguese versus European Portuguese, and audio versus like these avatars and versus other options. I landed on Practice Portuguese, which is fantastic for anyone who's looking to learn. And then I was like, okay, I work in applied AI. Let me see if I could actually apply some AI to this hobby quest of mine. So I spent way too long building this, which is a conversation app based in Streamlit. At the time, we were doing a lot of research and development in Streamlit, and I thought that Streamlit was the appropriate tool. Anyway, so I put in like the translate feature, the inline corrections, thematic word banks, all these things. And I was the saving feature by user. And I was so impressed with myself. I was so proud. And then immediately thereafter, Claude Code comes out and just trivializes the entire thing. But I'm not here to complain about Claude or complain about AI. That would be very weird in this setting. Or even talk about my AI ego death, as my wife called it, the experience of having no pride in anything anymore. But actually, what I did is I turned back to AI and I had some fun with it. So what I did is I went to Claude Chat and I asked for a whole slew of B2 level sentences in English. And then I attempted to translate these sentences. And then I submitted those translations to Claude and I said, okay, give me some corrections. This is a very small subset of the corrections I got. The first iteration of the slide actually had most of them, and it was completely illegible. I chose a sample of 5. So this isn't really all that helpful. I just got these highlighted errors that I made, so you don't need UMA there. Tomorrow, like a run. My cat likes to really sleep, which I guess is also true, but that's an error too. But anyway, this is not very helpful. This is just a list of errors. And if anything, it's actually just discouraging. So then I asked Claude to categorize the issues that I was, my own failures, my own issues with speaking Portuguese. So we have our classic false friends. We have co-location errors. And for those who don't know this, I didn't realize what this even was. This is like when you directly try to translate something and it's just not how it's said in the native language. I'd say, oh, I'll take a run, but you wouldn't say that in Portuguese. You'd fazer uma corrida. Something like if you have any doubts, that's a small collocation error, as opposed to do you have any questions? The prepositions and articles like por versus para, I never get right ever. So that did not surprise me. This is better for sure, but it's still not actionable, right? So I asked Claude to make it actionable. I said, hey, for each one of these problems, can you recommend a strategy that I could employ to improve? And here we have them. And indeed, this is very helpful. And I've done quite a few of these. Now I do actually practice phrases for vocabulary, like number 2 recommended. Number 4, I actually bought a radio and I've got a radio going in my kitchen all the time, playing Antenna And it's really nice to have a background noise as well, but also for just understanding how natural language is spoken. It's super helpful. And then I really love my little verb sheets with the indicative and the subjunctive and past and future. Anyways, this is great. Now let's talk about some AI, right? Let's talk about an AI use case. So here we have a customer service agent that is not quite ready for production. Like me, it is prone to misspeaking. The first one, we've got the wrong response to just a user who's just exasperated. The user is just complaining and it decides to cancel the membership. The second one, it randomly escalates the conversation to an internal strategy team. The third one, it just makes fun of the user, just heckles them. I'd say amnesiac. And then here it's super proactive in a bad way, just canceling orders for no reason. This sucks. So what can we do, right? So fortunately, we've got software technology to help us. And here I've got an example of a rise, which I'll describe. There's other tools like LangSmith. And I'm glad I've got a shout out for LangSmith later on. And I'm glad that I do, because actually this quote I've got here is actually from the CEO of LangSmith, not a rise, a guy named Harrison Chase. And I think this quote is really good, right? In software, the code documents the app, whereas in AI, the traces do, right? And that's, of course, because as we all know, the probabilistic nature of LLMs. What do we have here? This is an example of a trace. And the trace is basically the written log of what's going on underneath the hood of an agent, of one agentic experience. So it's got the user input message, it's got tool calls, it's got tool responses, it's got assistant messages, it's got the final output, et cetera. And even as you can see, we've got multiple agents going here, a budget agent, a research agent. So this even works for multi-agent systems. And what you can do with traces, very importantly, is you can evaluate them, you can assess them. And these evals are meant to, you want to create evals that proxy the performance of the actual agent. So you can assess, okay, the output that was provided to the user, was that grounded in the information the agent was collected from the tool responses, tool call responses? Did the output say anything inappropriate that you just didn't want it to say? Was the output relevant to the user question? So you could construct all of these metrics or evals to measure the performance of your agent. But when traces perform poorly, in other words, when there's bad user experiences, and you as an AI employee, professional, have to go in and resolve these, remediate these issues, traditionally, it's been a total slog doing this. It's a ton of work. It's awful. You've got to, hopefully you've got some kind of a script that can collect failures along some metric. And then you eyeballing like what's going on here. Why is it giving bad results? You've got to put on your prompt engineer hard hat, which doesn't fit right, because what is a prompt engineer, right? And you're basically doing this spray and pray method where you're trying to fix something. You're saying, okay, does that remediation work? Is it still doing that thing? Okay. So there's got to be a better way. And I'm here to assert that this is one of the better ways that there is. And there's different approaches you can take. This is what we chose. And basically, this is a set of skills, a set of Claude skills. So you can think of it as a Claude skill set. And I'm going to go into more detail on this, but I want to show you this just as like a representation of the sequence that the system goes through to improve your agent. So let's go back to the customer service agent. And we look back and we say, okay, again, this is just like the Portuguese example. This is not super helpful, just to see all these examples where the agent didn't perform all that well. So let's see, what could we do? Just like my example of learning Portuguese, what you can do is you can ask an agent to transform your pile of failures, that discouraging, messy, annoying collection that you had, and categorize it into failure patterns. Right? And then from each failure pattern, you can develop remediation steps to remediate those failure patterns. We've got the amnesia that we discussed. We've got the audacity in number 2 that we discussed. We've got the lack of empathy. And again, for each of these failure patterns, the agent can devise remediation methods. So perhaps we can improve system recall to handle the memory issue. Perhaps we can add a human in the loop to prevent audacious actions. Perhaps we can define some escalation rules. We can inject emotional awareness, clarification conditions, right? And now we have actionable next steps that the system can run through. So everything we just saw is basically what this guy is doing, this diagnostician is doing. And this is the first 2 or 3 steps of the skill set. or more precisely, the first 2 or 3 skills in the skill set. So what this guy's doing is collecting the failures that were seen in production, right? And then piling them in a giant list, and then pulling them off one by one and categorizing them. And then for each of the buckets, there's an associated remediation strategy. Then we have the repairman, right? Now this guy is going to be the one who's in charge of actually implementing and building, changing, updating, improving your code base to perform those remediations that the diagnostician recommended. Right, so what this looks like in practice is updating system messages, tool descriptions, the model itself, the architecture, right? Anything it was told by the diagnostician that would improve against these failures in the future. Okay, so we identified all the failures, we got them categorized, we developed these remediation steps, and we even implemented the remediation steps, and we've got this new code base. We're done, right? No, of course we're not done. We can't trust AI, we know that. There's various steps you should do to assert that what you've done is comprehensive and it's meaningful. The first step is to just straight away check whether what you've just done, the new system that you've created, can it actually now better resolve the failures that you just saw? Right, so if you collect a list of 50 failures, run them again with your new agent, and do you have a certain percentage of those that now are operating successfully? It's not going to be 100%, and it also won't be the same threshold that you've probably set for your regression test set, but choose a level that seems appropriate, and if it hits that level, then you move on. Now, here's the golden test set or the regression test set that I just referred to. So this is the collection of challenges or examples that your agent should be able to handle, right? And we're going to talk about it more later, but this is going to be a growing test set. But basically, this is now like the record of skills and challenges and questions that the agent should be able to answer, right? So what you do is you now retest that regression set or that golden data set against your new agent, and you ensure that the agent is performing just as well as it did before. You could include a small margin of error. We've got a 1 percentage point margin of error. Again, that just depends on your use case. But the idea is you want to still confirm that you're not just playing whack-a-mole, that you're fixing something, that the other stuff slides away, and you fix that, and then something else pops up. So this prevents you from that kind of doom loop, right? And then finally, you want evolution. So your system just learned stuff, and it grew as a result of those learnings. You want to ensure that the mistakes that you just saw, that the system just learned from, don't happen again, right? So what you do is for each one of these failure categories or failure patterns that you've identified, sample 1 or 2 of the examples, and you could also make them like a vanilla version of the sample if you don't want to use actual user data, but it should be a proxy of each one of the failure patterns. Now include those in the test set and grow it out. And don't worry if the test set keeps growing, which it will. You could always just, when you check for regression in the future, you could always just sample, say 100 questions or whatever you feel comfortable with. So it doesn't matter if your regression test set gets quite large. The whole point is this is an iterative process, right? You can continuously learn from your system failures. And the idea is that there's continuous growth. The cadence that you do this at, it's up to you. Start slowly, run it manually at first, and then you can get to a point where you're running it weekly or monthly or some kind of a schedule. Where do you start? I think prompting and tool descriptions is the best place to start. There's a lot of juice to squeeze right there. It's also quite natural to check it as a human to make sure that your system is operating appropriately. You don't have to stop there. You can actually apply changes to your entire agentic system. So for instance, is memory getting handled appropriately? Is orchestration operating the correct way? But actually what's interesting is this framework can be applied to any system where there are well-defined successes and failures, right? So if you think about a user onboarding flow where you might have 8 different steps to get to an onboarded user, you could actually think about those steps as nodes in a graph. And you could actually collect examples of users failing your onboarding flow and then identify the faulty nodes and then basically do surgery on those nodes to improve the flow. So interestingly, what we have is we're back to classic ML. This is basically backpropagation in a way. So the failures that we collect are the loss. The loss is then attributed back to the contributors to that loss that produced it. And then we make adjustments to those contributors to prevent future loss happening in the future. That's backpropagation. So just a couple practicalities. I talked about regression sets, golden data sets. This is a super important component. And what should you have in your golden data set? The biggest piece is you want it to be representative of what users are going to be challenged, or what users are going to challenge your agent with, right? You want it to be comprehensive. For us, we have an insights agent at PagerDuty, and our golden data set for the insights agent is split between user examples, service examples, team examples. We have point in time, we have trend, we have period over period. So we're trying to pressure test the agent against all these certain angles to make sure that it holds up under these conditions. I'd also recommend challenging it in other ways too. Infuse some ambiguity. Don't ask just very simple, straightforward questions. See if the agent can respond to tricky wording or phrasing. And then you also will probably want to assert that it can perform against different sort of users. So by that, different levels of authorization, for example, that it will provide or not provide information as appropriate, but also users with different levels of familiarity. So if it can learn familiarity of a user, it ought to respond to that familiarity in the right way. All right, so here's my LangSmith shout out. And what I want to emphasize here is how much this system depends on these evals or metrics. And as you can see in the screenshot, we've got a few: effectiveness, hallucination. There's many more. Effectiveness I spoke to earlier. Hallucination, we all know, can be a problem with LMs, and even stuff like token count and cost. Obviously, that's getting important now. The idea is this is your backbone. And another example is, let's say you have a routing agent. You would probably want an eval like classification accuracy, right? If the routing agent has to forward a request to a certain subagent, how well can it do that job? The idea is make your evals appropriate for your agent. The evals need to map to the expectations of the agent, right? Engineers are not meant to pick up the phones and make calls. Sales reps are not meant to ship code, not yet at least. So you really need you need to have fair assessments or evaluations of your agent. I didn't want to end on a total cliche like crawl, walk, run. So I made a very seemingly trivial modification to that, but I would actually argue it's not so trivial. I really do believe this system of agentic, iterative, systematic development has tremendous potential. And I'm very excited to see how we use that. So thank you. And that's it.